What makes you happy? Okay? It's related, I promise. Turn to one another, discuss what makes you happy, and we'll get started here in a couple of moments. I'm going to share with you a list of all the things that make me happy. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just the first thing that came to my mind. Here's what makes me happy. A full gas tank. Having mowed the lawn. My wife's ice cream cake recipe. A freshly clear to-do list. A Kenyan single origin pour-over coffee. Hello. My calendars. Yeah, I know. Kittens. Reese's peanut butter cups. Finishing a good book and marking it as read on Goodreads. Bananas. Air conditioning. A good night's rest. A clear nasal cavity. A Chipotle burrito bowl with white rice, black beans, veggies, chicken, mild and medium salsas, corn salsa, guac, and cheese in that order. Where are my Chipotle lovers at? Thank you! We got a couple here, thank you. Oh, and of course, my wife makes me happy. My kids make me happy. My church family makes me happy. The list could go on and on, as I'm sure it can for you too. We love to be happy. We strive to be happy. In fact, it's literally written into our inalienable rights as citizens of the United States for us to pursue happiness. We love to be happy, and there's certainly nothing wrong with being happy. The problem is the things we think make us happy don't do near as good of a job as we think they do. The problem with all these things is that they don't do as good of a job in making us happy as we think they do, because there is a crucial difference between a happy life and a vibrant life. That's what we're talking about today. Today, we're actually in the fourth and final week of a series called Vibrant Wesleyans. I don't know if you knew this, but we are a part of the Wesleyan denomination, which I'd like to tell people it's the world's largest denomination that people have never heard of before, basically, you know? But what we've been doing, it's been a really creative service in that we're looking through our three core values as a church. We call them the three Ws, the three Ws: worship, living a daily life with God; our words, learning wisdom and community; and our work, by leveraging our vocations for ministry. We've been talking about those three core values over the last 3 weeks through the lens of our Wesleyan heritage and the Methodist movement that broke out in the 1700s and how that still relates today. So if you are curious, not just to catch up on those sermons, but to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss a beat, if you scan the QR code here on your Connect card, it brings you to a little Linktree webpage where it has a bunch of helpful social links, including a link to our podcast. So you can subscribe on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts that way. But today, for our birthday service, we're going to take a deep dive into our mission statement. What does it mean to form a vibrant life that withstands hardship? And what does our Wesleyan heritage have to say about that? Because let me tell you, a vibrant life is not the same as a happy life. And maybe what you think a vibrant life is, I mean, that varies for all of us. Maybe you think a vibrant life is having all the things that make you happy going for you. Or maybe it's actually, not having any kind of hardship going on in your life. Maybe a vibrant life is you're successful in your career, you have lots of financial prosperity, you have all the awesome things going for you, you name it. But again, a happy life is not the same as a vibrant life. So what is a vibrant life? Well, here's what I believe. A vibrant life does not result from happiness, but from holiness. Okay? In fact, our founding father, John Wesley, said it himself: "For what end did God create man? You are made to be happy in God, and nothing else can make you happy." Our founding father, John Wesley, said, holiness, nearness to God is the way to go. And some of you are highly disappointed by that. Because, holiness really... holiness. And, it's one thing if we describe God as holy, right? He's a holy God, that makes sense. And it's another thing for us to use it as an adjective in some of our favorite common phrases like holy smokes or holy crap, right? But when it comes to describing other people as holy, we kind of cringe a little bit, don't we? It's kind of a sicky term to apply to someone else, let alone ourselves. It makes us antsy. So I don't know how you feel when you hear someone else described as holy, but I kind of get the same vibe as someone who's just like an etiquette expert, who's just really prim and proper and has this all of these really fancy ways of how they hold their lives. It's like that's how holiness comes across to us. And in fact, just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, let's take some words from etiquette expert William Hansen on how to conduct a proper lifestyle. Because I think this is what holiness often feels like to us. Let's go ahead and roll that clip.
I'm an etiquette coach, and I'm here to answer the internet's burning etiquette questions. This is etiquette support. Quellinks is saying, what's the proper way to stir the tea, clockwise or anti-clockwise? Great question, and the answer is neither. Instead, we stir in a back and forth 6-12, 6-12 motion, gently flicking the teaspoon at the top of the cup, not banging around like that, thank you very much. Set it back in line with the handle and enjoy. We have a question now from Joe P.E. Haley. How do you eat your peas? Excellent question. Cue the peas. Thank you so much. Just ordered this plate of peas from the nearest available tin. What we don't do is scoop like this. In really casual dining, that might be permissible, but in more formal dining, we're going to use both the fork and the knife. Some people do this. I think this is more difficult to keep those peas balanced. You see, there we go, one's gone. It's much better to just spear them onto the tines of your fork and eat like so. At Richard Bicknays is asking, what fork etiquette do you use? I'm sure I'd get roasted in Europe for my very American knife and fork etiquette. Well, yes, there are some differences. In Britain, when we're using a knife and fork together, they are both held at the same time. The knife stays low. We obviously don't put the knife anywhere near our mouth, and the food is conveyed via the fork. And in Britain, the tines of the fork, the prongs, always face downwards. Now in America, they will start like this, cut a little bit of food, place the knife down on the edge of the plate, turn the fork over, stab and eat, pick up the knife, cut another little bit of food. This is an aerobic exercise. This is not relaxing in any way. So we don't suggest eating like that in Britain, but of course in America it's perfectly correct if that's how they wish to eat.
I am both so impressed and so put off at the same time, Like, who do you think you are, William Hansen, with your British accent and how you eat your peas and all that stuff, Like, I am so inspired by this guy's manners, but also, he kind of makes me feel like the scum of the earth with how I use my peas and how I use my silverware and all those things. And I think that's how we often feel whenever we're around holy people. It's because there's some misnomers about holiness and what it means to be a holy person I think we need to address. And first, it's that holiness is often associated with moral superiority. William Hansen's etiquette is truly superior than any of ours, so that's why we might view him, or at least me, as a bit snooty and better than us because of it. And likewise, if we ever claim even to be a holy person, others might think of us as being a holier-than-thou personality. As if everything we say is right and believe is right, and everyone else is wrong, and everything we do, even down to the most trivial of matters, is better than everyone else. And of course, that's really off-putting to a lot of people because we assume holiness means that you're morally superior. Okay, that's the first misnomer. The second misnomer is that holiness is just a bunch of rules. Okay, so just like proper etiquette is just a bunch of staunch rules, many of us think being a holy person means you also have to ascribe to really staunch rules that might even limit your fun in a lot of ways. In that video, William Hansen also has advice on how to eat a cheeseburger like the size of your face. You know what his advice is? You put the cheeseburger down, you remove the buns, and then you use your knife and fork and you cut it and eat it that way. Like, where do you get off? Where's the fun in that? You got to let all the juices just gum down your hands. You get it all over your face. Like a good burger requires you to not put it down because otherwise it falls apart, right? In a similar way, perhaps we might recall if you grew up in church, maybe there was that one elderly woman who just kind of looked at you if you came in with a dress that wasn't, covering your ankles. Or God forbid you were wearing a hat and jeans in church, Or even there were some Christian circles in the church a while ago that parents wouldn't let their kids watch Pokemon because it had themes of evolution in it. I know this because I was one of those kids, okay? And so we kind of associate all these arbitrary rules with holiness that just go so deeply into these matters that at the end of the day make us feel like it limits our fun and our ability to live. Which leads to this third misnomer of holiness, and is that holiness can't possibly make me happy. Like, I cannot imagine living with proper etiquette like William Hanson would ever make me happy. Like, I want to eat my peas with a spoon. I want to stir my tea clockwise, for crying out loud, or all these other things. And so if we think holiness is just simply following all these shoulds and shouldn'ts, and it's all these staunch rules, and if it's going to oppress the things that make us happy, then of course we're not going to chase that. That bar is too high. So we're going to go drinking. We're going to go befriend people who make us feel good, even if they're not the best influences for us. We're going to gossip about our peers. We're going to look at the porn. We're going to sleep with whoever we want. We're going to live the double life to match the people that we're around with in that moment. Because if that's what holiness is, if that's a desire that God has for our life and it's oppressing my happiness, let alone it's just all these arbitrary things that I'm going to mess up with every single day, one, that's unappealing, that's hard to reach, and quite frankly, it's boring. And quite certainly, all those concerns would be true and valid if those misnomers were true to begin with. Because that's exactly the thing. Those are misnomers. Those assumptions and perceptions of holiness are not based in truth, okay? I don't know where you're at today. I don't know what you've done. I don't know what you believe or where you're coming from. But hear me today. If you're longing for happiness, if you're longing for meaning, if you're longing for purpose, a vibrant life, look no further than holiness. Look no further than holiness. Holiness is not the wall that blocks happiness, but the path that leads to true happiness. Okay? Holiness is not the wall that blocks happiness, but the path that leads to true happiness. To get a full grasp of what holiness even is, okay, if it's none of those misnomers, what is it? We got to start at the very beginning. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. This is the first sentence in the Bible, okay? And here's what it says. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So what this implies is that before creation, there was only God in his infinite divine nature. And then at some point in his infinitude, he snaps his fingers and creates everything in the cosmos. And so now we have two entities, the creator and the created. Okay? The creator and the created. And so holiness is first and foremost the acknowledgement about how God is the creative force behind the universe and life itself. There's no one else like God. He's completely and utterly unique. He doesn't depend on anything for him to exist, whereas all of creation has to rely on him to exist. Okay? That is the first thing we need to learn about holiness, and it's that holiness isn't about moral superiority, but about being set apart. Okay? Holiness isn't moral superiority, it's about being set apart. It's not so much about being better than others. In fact, it's nothing about being better than others, but being distinct. Just as God himself, as the creator, is distinct from all of the physical realm that he created. You see that? So that's the first thing about God, is that he is holy, he is set apart, he is distinct from everything else. Now here's the other half of this, okay? Lean in here. This is really, really crucial, okay? God's holiness specifically derives from his creation of life, all right? Our God is a God of life. He brought everything into existence, and therefore he knows all the things that ultimately contribute to a healthy life that prospers us and helps us flourish. Therefore, anything that promotes death, destruction, corruption, or harm to his creation is what's considered unholy. Okay? And we see this come into the picture in Genesis chapter 3. Genesis 2, we see the creation of Adam and Eve, the very first humans in history. And in Genesis chapter 3, Satan, the adversary against God himself, who represents all things anti-life, unholy, tempts Adam and Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And after they do so, and sin enters the world, what happens? Hiding, lying, deception, corruption. And that's exactly what sin does. Sin is 100% anti-life because it destroys, corrupts, and kills. It goes against everything in God's design for creation. That's why Paul writes this in Romans chapter 5. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world. And Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. So sin brings death physically, spiritually, emotionally, racially, into every single part of our life. And I know this specifically because I suffered from a pornography addiction when I was in junior high school into early high school. And at first, I thought this was the most exciting thing in the world, truly. I was thrilled about it. It made me feel good, and so surely I was like, this got to be a good thing if it makes me feel good, right? But the further it progressed, the more vulgar it got. And what originally I thought was going to bring me happiness and make me feel good actually did the opposite. I became more depressed. The view I was developing of women was completely changing and deteriorating. I was enslaved to this. I was no longer free. And that's what sin does. It tempts us with a good, happy life, but really it just destroys it. Maybe you can relate. That thing you thought was going to be good. That thing you thought that was going to bring you happiness. But it just wound up being a huge bait and switch. Now you're caught in it. Thankfully, God comes to the rescue. Thankfully, he doesn't leave us there. Here's what Paul continues to say in Romans 5 when he says, "For the sin of this one man, Adam, caused death to rule over many. But even greater is God's wonderful grace and his gift of righteousness. For all who receive it will live in triumph over sin and death through this one man, Jesus Christ." Yes, Adam's one sin brings condemnation for everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God and new life to everyone. Because one person disobeyed God, many became sinners. But because one other person obeyed God, many will be made righteous. So here's the cool clash of the things that are unholy and the things that are holy, of death versus life. Because Jesus came and lived a perfect holy life and died for our sins, which is anti-life, because our punishment should have been physical and eternal death, separation from God for all of eternity. But because Jesus was raised to life and ascended into heaven, when we believe in him and when we go all in for Jesus as a foundation for our life, what do we get? A vibrant life. A new life is what Paul says. A new way of thinking, a new way of living, a new way of not being enslaved to the things that have dragged us down for so long. Okay? Because here's the thing about holiness. People can only be holy the closer they get to God. Holiness is 100% derivative from God himself. You cannot get it yourself, especially by following your own set of arbitrary rules like not wearing hats in church or by not watching Pokemon. Thank goodness, right? Pokemon's great. I endorse it. Watch it as much as you want, right? You can be holy, and you can only be holy. You can only be holy the closer you get to God. And the closer we get to God, the more we learn about who he is, then we start to discover all the other things in our life. He starts to illuminate the things of our life, the sins, the stuff that's corrupting us, that's leading us away from the direction that he has for us, and we start to shed that stuff off. We start to change our habits. We start to change the way we think. We start to change the way we live. We start to change the people we're around with so that we can be holy, not in a morally superior sense, but in a way that is distinct, distinguished, set apart from the rest of the world. You see how that works? And I love what Paul says in Romans 6. He goes hard here. This is just a final nail in the coffin with this. When he says, should we keep on sinning so that God can show us more and more of his wonderful grace? Of course not. Since we have died to sin, how can we continue to live in it? Or have you forgotten that when we were joined with Christ Jesus in baptism, we joined in his death? For we died and were buried with Christ by baptism. And just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glorious power of the Father, now we also may live new lives. A vibrant life. And this concept, this idea, this reality of holiness, of being set apart and distinguished and having God work in you, that was the central theme and focus of the Methodist movement that broke out in Great Britain, went overseas into the United States in the late 1700s, and has seen massive revivals across the world because of John Wesley's belief that you can be set free from the power of sin over your life. You can be set free by the chains that hold you down, by the bondage that the enemy holds over you. The things that you are not satisfied to admit, he can set you free from that. In fact, he already has. Salvation in Jesus is not just something you get so that you can go to heaven after you die and then you can do whatever you want. No, it is for this life right now. John Wesley himself defined salvation as not barely deliverance from hell or going to heaven, but a present deliverance from sin, a restoration of the soul to its primitive health, its original purity, a recovery of the divine nature, the renewal of our souls after the image of God, in righteousness and true holiness, and justice, mercy, and truth. So if you want to know what makes you happy, it's going all in with God. It's going all in from God. Everything else that makes you happy is just the extra blessing, the extra icing on the cake, for he is the real deal. He's the main course of this meal. But yet, far too many people are only content with what John Wesley called almost Christian. Being an almost Christian. These are people who claim they're Christians because they don't swear, they don't drink, and, they're generous people, they do all these good deeds. Maybe they still don't watch Pokemon, right? And they come to church, they do all these things, but they're living a double life. They're still living with unconfessed sin that they're not ashamed about. They're going through the motions with their church attendance. They're one person on Sunday, and then they're another person around other people on Monday and Tuesday. And this is all because they haven't given themselves over to Jesus and the life that he brings. And although an almost Christian seems like a Christian, Wesley says an almost Christian is not a Christian at all. Because if Jesus is real, if he is the anointed Son of God who died for every single one of us, raised to life so we can have new life, then man, our life better show for it. Should it not? It should show for it. Doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. Doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. But when you do, you are quick to recognize them. You repent of them so that you can let God continue to work in your life. There's a huge difference. So instead, I advise us to be all-in Christians. Don't be an almost Christian, be an all-in Christian, because that's when things get real. When you surrender your life to him and you lay everything down and you say, God, have your way. I am done with this. I'm making the change. Look, my pornography addiction blocked me from growing closer to God. I felt like I had hit a wall. I wasn't growing. Holiness wasn't blocking my way towards happiness. Sin was. Sin was. And it wasn't until I confessed that sin with my parents and my friends and some other people, and I started being held accountable for my actions, that I was able to burst through that wall and start practicing new habits that gave me life as God designed it to be. Because again, he's the creator of life after all. We should listen to what he has to say about how we should live our life. And again, it didn't mean I was perfect instantaneously. It didn't mean I struggled along the way. There was so much I learned through that process. But I became holier because of that process. Not because I'm morally superior or because I'm following a set of arbitrary rules, but because I'm able to grow closer to God. And the things that held me back are being shed away. And that continues to be my story every single day. I have kids, trust me. There's always something more I can be growing and learning in. That's what the vibrant life in Jesus holds. So the question then is, what does that actually look like? What do we got to do for us to live out our salvation in Jesus and with a holiness that actually draws us nearer to God? So as much as we hate the thought of rules for being a holy person, wouldn't you know, John Wesley gives us 3. But they're not the rules you think they are, okay? These are more so indicators of our holiness if we're actually going all in with our life in God. And the first is to avoid evil and do no harm. Pretty self-explanatory. Don't do bad things, because bad things are anti-life. Sin is anti-life. It goes against God's creation to see the universe and humanity prosper. And I mean, you can think of everything. The list is endless. Wesley even included examples himself. Let's hear what some of those are, right? So, avoid taking the Lord's name in vain. Don't get into fights. Don't get drunk. Don't break the Sabbath, because if you don't rest, you're not letting your body rejuvenate, therefore you're harming yourself, He also advised not to speak evil things about government officials. Hello, election season. I'm going to let that one sit just a little bit longer. He advised us not to wear costly apparel because it can make you prideful about your appearance or indulging in unnecessary spending that could otherwise be given to the poor. Okay? He even advised against, quote, singing those songs or reading those books which do not tend to the knowledge or love of God, unquote. Translation, what's your media consumption habits? What shows are we watching? What profiles are we following? Are they contributing to us in learning the ways of God and making us holier people, or are they actually detracting from us? So much more of who we are is based off of what we consume than what we realize. Okay? So if we can learn to do no harm and to avoid evil and find those things instead that can grow us in our holiness, and that's the way to go. However, just not doing bad things isn't enough, because Wesley also said that we are to give evidence of our salvation by doing good. Yes, we got to do good things. We need to do good things because, again, it promotes life as God designed it. That's why holiness for Wesley is simply the love of God and the love of neighbor. That's all it boils down to. Is God the center of your life? And do you love people? And the examples are endless as well. He suggests caring for the sick, giving food to the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the sick or imprisoned. You know, maybe for you that's helping a peer with a homework assignment, or maybe helping a coworker when they're having a really bad day and actually listening, right? There are so many things that we can do to help others. But, hear me, our holiness isn't just demonstrated by doing these good acts of piety to individuals when they come up, or trying to be a good person, but it also means spreading the vibrant life of holiness into other people and society as a whole. Okay, holiness is also about society transformation. Here's the amazing thing about the Wesleyan Methodist movement in the 1700s, of which we derived from, is that they weren't content with just visiting the sick. They started clinics for the urban poor that provided medical care without cost. They didn't just visit prisoners, they also sought prison reform. They didn't just care for children in poverty, but they worked for the passage of labor laws and started orphanages and schools for kids who couldn't afford it. Right? Holiness isn't just simply transforming your own life or even the lives of other individuals. Wesley and early Wesleyans sought the transformation of the entirety of society. And perhaps there's no stronger conclusion of this than the abolition of slavery, which was done by Wesleyans. Okay, on his deathbed, John Wesley went on to say, when he wrote to William Wilberforce, a member of Parliament and also a major opponent of slavery, just as Wesley was, that to go on in the name of God and in the power of his might, till even American slavery, the vilest that ever saw the sun, shall vanish away before it, was in John Wesley's letter. And sure enough, that was a week before he died, and then only 50 years after that, in the United States, there was a small little sect, a small little group of people led by this guy named Orange Scott, who was not content with what the church was doing about slavery. And they wanted to recapture this idea, this goal that holiness should spread throughout the land and motivate people to prosper and flourish in every possible way, and that meant getting rid of slavery. And so they started this movement. They planted anti-slavery churches in the South, and they were advocating for this until it finally came to a head in the Civil War. And it started with this little group of Methodists who were not content with just not doing evil, but also wanted to do good and end this thing. And that little branch grew into this huge movement that finally broke off of the Methodist Church and became what we now know as the Wesleyan Church. That is the heritage and legacy that we are sitting in today. It's not just about what God does here, it's about what we can do for all people outside of this place to see justice and mercy restored. Okay, so we need to avoid all evil and do no harm. We need to do good. Lastly, we need to attend to God's ordinances. What does that mean? God's ordinances, this is just simply a fancy phrase for the practices that draw us closer to God, okay? Anybody can just avoid evil and do good things. But what can we specifically do to draw closer to God as disciples of Jesus? And this is actually such an important thing that we're going to devote a whole 4-week sermon series to it in 2 weeks. Okay? So Labor Day, we're going to have a special service. Mason's preaching next week, which is going to be awesome. And then after that, on September 8th, we're going to start this new series called Formed, Or we're learning about how to be formed into God's image. How can we reflect Christ-likeness and holiness to the world, and the specific habits and practices we can do to form us into a vibrant life, right? You don't want to miss it. All 4 Sundays in September is going to be awesome. Be there, be square, okay? Holding you to it. This is a lot. Still with me? Still with me? I think we need to wrap this thing up. Let's go ahead and have our worship team come back up here. And I just want to remind us, as good as Chipotle burrito bowls are, and as great as Pokemon is, and everything else on your list that make us happy, let me tell you, they will not fulfill you. And they fall enormously short in comparison to what only God can do. John Wesley wrote, God made you and everyone else, and he made you all to be happy in him, and nothing else can make you happy. Nothing else. And maybe for some of you, maybe you've been pretty nominal in your faith. You've known church is important. You've gone to church because your parents took you. You know, and that's maybe why you're here, or maybe for a number of other reasons. You follow Jesus your whole life, but you've never thought like, man, this is where my life comes from. This is where my source of purpose and meaning come from. It's not just supposed to be a little side hustle to the life and your career ambitions. Vibrant lives in Jesus comes from him being front center in all things. Oh man, and Romans 6:12-14 really hit this home when Paul writes, to not let sin control the way you live. Do not give in to sinful desires. Do not let any part of your body become an instrument of evil to serve sin. Instead, give yourselves completely to God. Surrender, for you were dead, but now you have new life. So use your whole body as an instrument to do what is right for the glory of God. Sin is no longer your master, for you no longer live under the requirements of the law. Instead, you live under the freedom of God's grace. Do we believe that Jesus can set us free? Amen? Jesus can set us free. And there is just a whole new way for you to live if you focus more on God's grace instead of all of your shortcomings. Oh, man. It's the epitome of a vibrant life. So my challenge for us is to refuse to be almost Christians. The world changed because of the Methodist movement. What actually started as a small group of 4 or 5 college guys, including John and Charles Wesley, who were just devoted to not being nominal Christians and actually being serious about this, resulted in this discipleship movement that transformed thousands upon thousands upon thousands of lives throughout Great Britain into the United States and now all across the world. And it starts with this moment of surrendering to God and the vibrant life that he has in store for you. So what are the things that you need to surrender? What are the things that we need to give up? Because I think we need to make sure God has it all, and when we go all in, here's what I believe. We will see revival happen in this community. We will see an awakening unlike any other to this university, to our region, and it is because of every single one of us being serious about this. But we have to get honest about the things he needs from us.